Welcome to Church Without Walls. I'm John, and this is Distracted. We're going to talk about a few things today that I think are really exciting. Hope you grab a bagel and a coffee or an English muffin or whatever suits your fancy and curl up and listen to the next 20 minutes or so because we're going to talk about something I think really important for I don't want to say followers of Jesus. How about just fans? Just fans of Jesus, or maybe people who are interested in spiritual conversations. We're going to talk about inspiration today. Inspiration. Poe, what inspires you lately?
Stromboli.
Stromboli?
Duh.
You're going to have to tell them what that means, because that's like a big inside joke. So, you want me to talk, or you talk?
You could talk.
We play this game. The only game I like, the only board game that's worth playing, in my opinion, is called Outsmarted. It's something you could play with people who are out of state. So we play it with our Uncle Gordy, who lives all the way out in Washington, D.C., and it's a trivia game, and it asks all kinds of different category questions. Well, one question that Poe and I know very well the answer to was in a category called Finish the Quote. And yesterday, out popped on the screen, take the gun, leave the blank. And then they give you four options to choose from, A, B, C, and D. They're very generous. But when we looked at the options, there wasn't cannoli as the right answer. The famous line from Godfather, The Godfather Part 1, take the gun, leave the cannoli. The closest thing to cannoli as an answer was answer D, Stromboli. So after we lost it, and you have about 30 seconds to answer the question, we just entered Stromboli with 10 seconds left, and we realized that it must be somebody who's never seen the movie who typed that in. Probably somebody who doesn't speak English, maybe, or Italian, got a little confused. So that's our new inside joke is take the Stromboli, and that inspires you lately? All right. We're going to talk about inspiration. Title today is Jimi, the Grateful Dead, and Jesus, because it reminds me of one of my favorite people in the world. All that coming up next. Poe, you haven't heard this story yet, and I know you love when I tell old stories. And this one was about one of my favorite people. So, here it goes. You ready? From about the age of 14, I'd say, to 50. Is it 50? Yeah, right around 50. I knew everything. Seriously, I had all the answers. I was watching an interview with Bart Ehrman yesterday, and he was talking about his career in evangelicalism, and he said, answering a criticism that he wasn't really a theologian, he said, coming up in Moody Bible Institute, he was really into Louis Sperry Chafer's systematic theology, which I wanted to ask him through the television screen. Did you have the mere 4-volume set, or did you have the 7 to 8 volume set that the real theologians had? Because I had the 8-volume set that was passed down to me from my father. But it made me smile when he said that, and so I knew everything. I was in a world of certainty, and from 14 to 50, I had studied all the answers to all the difficult questions, and I knew everything. And this sadly stunted a lot of my relationships and a lot of my own personal growth. So I feel like right now I'm 56, and I'm ready to be 18. I think I'm ready to be 18 again. I think I have the proper mindset to be a rather mature 18-year-old. But here goes. In my 20s, I worked on a construction crew. And it was mostly in the, Cubs fans will love this, in the Wrigley Field area. We built bars. We remodeled apartment buildings, all kinds of stuff. And One of the guys I worked with was a few years older than me. I might have been in my early 20s. He might have been in his mid to late 20s. And his name was John, too. And John was the kind of person, when you met him, if you could picture him, kind of curly, dark hair. Didn't have a beard or a mustache, but he always had a 29-hour scruff. So, typical Chicago guy. You couldn't help but love him. He was always smiling. John was the type of guy who, if you had to move and you asked him to help you out on a Saturday, he'd show up and he'd stay with you till the job was done. But he wouldn't show up at 8 in the morning. He might straggle in about 1:30, bloodshot eyes, but he'd be there. He'd be there, and he'd get you through it. That was John. John, give you the shirt off his back, John. But one of the times we were sharing an adult beverage after work, or sharing a few moments together, because we'd go canoeing and stuff. We'd hang out on the weekends. We'd go through different shops in Chicago, and John was a great lover of music. And famously, Jimi Hendrix had once said, music is his religion. And John kind of paraphrased that. When I started to talk to John, because he knew I was active in the church, and when I started to talk to John, I wasn't, proselytizing. I was just talking to him. It just came up naturally. I wasn't that real pushy type. Making him make a decision for Christ or anything like that. We were just talking, and I was sharing my joy in my faith at the moment. And when it got to be John's turn, right, John said, my God is Jimi Hendrix, and my religion is the Grateful Dead. Now, John was a Deadhead. John followed the Dead pretty much in the summers. He'd take like a month off, follow the Dead. So this is back in the day when they were still happening. Jared Garcia was still around, and John would follow them when he'd get a chance, at least 2 weeks to a month every year. And I laughed it off at the time. I just thought that's John's way of saying that organized religion or maybe Christianity just isn't for him. He just didn't have an interest, Now, I'm somebody who at the time appreciated Jimi Hendrix. The Grateful Dead, I don't get it. I still don't get it. I like them as human beings. I find them interesting. I have a couple of songs in my playlist, but it just doesn't do anything for me. But I love Jimi Hendrix. Who doesn't love Jimi Hendrix? And so when John said this, Jimi Hendrix is my God, and the Grateful Dead is my religion, I didn't think deeply about it. I was not a follower of the lasso way at the time. So as Walt Whitman said, be curious, not judgmental. I was judgmental. And I wasn't cruel about it. I just kind of laughed and ignored it. But I didn't ask anything. I wasn't curious. I didn't say, tell me more about that. And I wish I could go back in time. And John, if you ever hear this, I'm sorry. I wish I could go back in time and ask John what was so inspiring to him about Jimi and the Dead. Is it the lyrics? Is it the music? Is it the feeling you get when you go to a Dead concert? I'm sure it was all of the above, but I would like to know how John got to that moment in time and how he brought it up in the context of spirituality. Something there inspired him. Something there resonated with him, made him feel alive. And I thought, there's so many Christians, and I was one of them, who would basically say, it's just Jesus for me, right? Just Jesus or just the Bible. There's no wisdom outside of that. You might not say that, but you really thought that. I remember as a pastor for 20 years, sometimes I would quote outside my tribe. We were non-denominational, somewhat dispensational free grace church. I say somewhat because when I became pastor, I kind of toned it down on the dispensationalism. I saw it as a tool, not as a way of life. But so anyway, if I would quote a Catholic or even somebody outside the faith, or if I would quote what now would be considered a progressive Christian, I'd hear about it. I'd get an email. Somebody would walk up to me at halftime between services. I quoted Brennan Manning once. It almost started a church split. This happens in environments like that. You really believe that outside the Bible there's no wisdom. Like there's no world history outside of the Bible. There's nothing worth. There's nothing that's inspiring outside of the wisdom of the Bible or of Jesus Christ. It's just Jesus. That is kind of a virtual signal to fellow Christians that you're really righteous. You're really on fire. You're really centered. The Holy Spirit's really indwelling within you. And you just can't give credit to anyone else. Online earlier this week, a friend of mine posted something that was kind of stoic, that our mindset should really only be inclined to entertain that which is within our control, because there are things outside of our control. And if we fret or worry about those things, it'll be distracting, it'll be paralyzing, and so forth. And so it's really the Stoic doctrine of Epictetus and others that says we should really only focus and concentrate on that which is within our control. We don't control the weather. We could control our response to it. We don't control really these massive movements of government, but we could control our response to it. And that was the kind of thing. It was a healthy thing. It was a philosophical thing that's not controversial and that's not really debatable. And yet a Christian chimed in there saying, oh, Paul would disagree with this. Wasn't Pauline. You couldn't find it in Colossians. Actually, if you look deep, there's a lot of Stoic doctrine in Paul. But this guy doesn't look deep. Most Christians don't look deep. They don't realize that Paul quoted Greek poets, and even, by the way, even Christ quoted a Greek poem when he said, when he mentioned to Paul that hard is it for you to kick against the goads, right? That comes out of a Greek play. But forget all that, because really wisdom, as the unfortunate comforters in Job, wisdom only comes from our tribe, and when we die, it'll die with us. And that's kind of an environment that we have in Christianity. I wish I was more curious with people growing up. I wish I would have listened to John instead of kind of silently judged him and dismissed him as somebody who was maybe shallow or maybe was, not a full person because he had closed the door, shut the door on faith or religion or Christianity. And I don't know John's background. Maybe he grew up in the Catholic Church and he saw the mess that had become of the bishops covering for Catholic priests and so forth. I don't know what his background was. Maybe he grew up in a very strict household and there was no love. There was only law, and there was hypocrisy and judgment. I don't know what his background was as far as that's concerned, because I didn't ask, because I didn't listen, because I had all the answers anyway. And John, I don't know, was missing a few strings on his guitar. So anyway, I bring that up to you to talk about this. This is a quote that I use the term gatekeepers once in a while. There's a group of Christians that are seeing the changes going on in the church and in the faith, and it drives them mad. And it's not very unlike conservatives in politics who want to so bad, not all conservatives, but the kind that want to go back to the 1950s, because that was the golden age. There was nothing wrong in the 1950s. It was like happy days, but there really wasn't racism. Forget all the things we still talk about. There wasn't really patriarchy where women were second-class citizens. There wasn't homophobia, transphobia, that kind of thing where where that was just a freak show and a sin. We need to go back to the 50s, when a kid could buy a carton of cigarettes in the lobby of the JoJo's. There are some people that cling to yesterday as the golden age, and that happens in religion. And so every time there is a voice that comes forward that challenges the status quo, they're in their day a heretic and somebody who should be stoned or crucified or thrown out of the tribe, certainly have his books burned or so forth, or threatened. People are threatened by change. They don't want reformation or deconstruction. They fight against it. But then when we look back in the rearview mirror, we see that that was necessary. And that's because all of life depends on adaptation. Really, evolution isn't just a clue for biology. Natural selection, it's a clue to understanding all of life in all of its phases. And if you aren't growing and adapting, then you're becoming extinct. Now, there's a group of Christians who see what's happening in the Western church, and it frightens them. And they're scared. And so they lash out and they lash back. And this is an example of a gatekeeper, somebody who doesn't want change to take place. And this you can see especially in apologetics. So this is an apologetics site. I'm sorry. Let me throw this up on the screen. You know what? I'm not going to throw that one up. Let me throw up this one first, because this is what I'm going to respond to. This is Veracity Hill, which is an apologetics site, sharing an Alyssa Childers quote, who I would consider a gatekeeper. And she says, when I have doubts about my faith, by the way, I'd question if she does have any doubts about her faith, because she never expresses any. She kind of tips a hat, like, I think she was like I was from the age of 14 to 50. I think she knows everything. But she's really not talking about herself. She's talking about all of us who do have doubts about our faith, right? She's trying to tell us how to behave and how to think. That's what comes out here. And I know I'm judging her, and forgive me for that, but see if it doesn't kind of resonate. When I have doubts about my faith or deep nagging questions that keep me up at night, I don't have the luxury, look at the language here, of finding, quote, my truth, because I'm committed to the truth. I want to know what is real. I want my worldview, the lens through which I see the world, to line up with reality. God either exists or he doesn't. The Bible is his word or it's not. Jesus was raised from the dead or he wasn't. Christianity is true or it isn't. There is no my truth when it comes to God. Now, this is curious to me, because if you look at these one by one, God either exists or he doesn't. It's quite possible that God exists, but the second one isn't true. But maybe the Bible's not his word. But in Alyssa Childers' reckoning, in her reality, and it is her truth, God exists, the Bible's his word, Jesus was raised from the dead, and Christianity is true. That's what she's trying to get across here. And then she says there's no my truth when it comes to God. So this is an either-or situation. It's dichotomous. It's black and white thinking. Either all of this is true or none of it is true. You see, you've got to kind of sign on for the whole thing. And that's curious, right? That seems to be a big leap. That does seem to be Alyssa Childers expressing her truth. Now, if you asked her to defend her truth, some of that she might have good arguments for, but all of it? Really? There's no wiggle room in there? Then what are your doubts about? If they're not about God, Jesus, the Bible, and Christianity, what are your doubts about, and how do you process them? So this is kind of a way for Christian gatekeepers to say, you got to keep thinking, really, that doubt is the bad guy. Doubt's the bad guy, And this is how doubt is treated in the church. You're not treated as somebody who's curious or somebody like in the world of science who really wants to find the truth, who wants to test the spirits and to hold fast to that which is true, who, like the Old Testament says, the Hebrew scriptures say, a man is a fool who only listens to one side and takes a choice. He should listen to both sides, because until each argument is kind of like cross-examined, then it's not. We're not ready to make a discerning choice, right? That all goes away when you're talking about Christian apologetics, when you're talking about this kind of tribalism. And this is being supported in apologetics. So you think like us, or you're really not one of us, right? You're with us or you're against us. Well, I just commented. I'm going to share my comment with you, and we could talk about that a little bit. So my comment to this was listing the Bible and Christianity, which are fallible and diverse, and in some cases contradictory, with God the Father and God the Son is not devotion. It's folly, even soft blasphemy that becomes a form of idolatry. This quote, the quote I just read you from Melissa Childers, is simple virtual signaling to the tribe of dichotomous, fearful adherents who manufacture goblins to fend off. Now, whether you agree with the second half of my quote or not, let's talk about the first half. She has made 4 arguments here. God exists, the Bible's his word, Jesus was raised from the dead, Christianity is true, right? That is her truth, and that's what she's saying. She doesn't have the luxury to question any of those. But when you put the Bible, by the way, you have to interpret the Bible. I think Carl Jung, the great psychologist, the great, psychiatrist, right? Or a leader in psychiatry, at least. He once said regarding the Protestant movement that what he feared was that now, and not that he was supporting the Catholic Church, but he said what he feared about the Protestant movement was now it will eventually be true that every man becomes a church. Every man becomes a church. You could say that was prophetic because we have now about 40,000 denominations in Protestantism. And even among tribes, there's radical differences. When I was in evangelicalism, when I was the pastor at that Grace Church, you want to see a lack of grace, go to a Grace conference and see how they argue about really foolish things. You know, did the church start in Acts 2 or Acts 9 or Acts 13 or, Acts 28? Were the 12 disciples, were they in the church or still part of Israel? All kinds of soul sleep, all kinds of crazy arguments. Who wrote Hebrews? And some of them they take it to the mattresses, as they say in The Godfather. Some of it gets kind of like somebody's making a power move in the Five Families. And this is just 40,000 denominations. Carl Jung was right here. So she brings up the Bible. There's multiple interpretations of the Bible. People take it different ways. First of all, there isn't one Bible. There's about at least 6. The Coptic, the Syriac. There's the modern there's the modern Protestant Bible. There was the early Protestant Bible, which differs. The King James 1611, massively different from the King James today, not just because it doesn't carry the Apocrypha today, but because of changes in it. You have the Bible's a library, and there's about 6 of them to choose from. The Catholic Bible has different books. The Orthodox Church. So that, to talk about the Bible like it's a univocal voice, like it's one voice, as if the authors had been dictated to by God, or if God sat down after the authors wrote and kind of edited it to it, so he put his stamp on every word and even the space between the words, like some people try to say. even if the Bible, sola scriptura, was absolutely perfect, men have to interpret it, and we know men aren't perfect. And we know men have different interpretations. So there's kind of a loophole there with the Bible. But what about with Christianity? I think this is the biggest problem with the modern church and apologetics is I think the energy that is spent on defending the church when the church shouldn't be defended is outrageous. And people think the more you defend the church, the more you love God and you love Christ. And they fail to see that the prophets didn't do that. They fail to see that Jesus Christ didn't do that. He wanted to cleanse the church because it was a den of thieves, because it was contrary to what he saw was the true church. Same thing with Paul. The same thing with the reformers. Somebody posted recently that we should embrace Reformation but not deconstruction. He doesn't realize Reformation was deconstruction. It was deconstruction from a bunch of nonsense that the Catholic Church had instituted over the years. And the reformers themselves said, ever reforming. We must ever be reforming. But that stopped 500 years ago. Because what sets in is the status quo. What sets in is you can't touch this. Right? This is perfect. You can't touch this. And those who do are outcasts and heretics, maybe apostates and so forth. And so here's the thing about this quote. She's including, with God the Father and God the Son, she's including the Bible is God's word or it isn't. Is it that clear? Couldn't the Bible contain God's word and not contain God's word? Couldn't portions of the Bible be inspired and portions of the Bible be not inspired? Couldn't, as C.S. Lewis pointed out, when truth is found in any written work, can't we say that was inspired by God? Whether it is the book of Job or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? See, now we are treading on the altar of the idolaters. Now we're pushing over idols in the temple, and now we get stoned, right? So the Bible's his word or it's not. Jesus was raised from the dead or he wasn't. Christianity is true or it isn't. I just want to ask you, what Christianity? The snake-handling Pentecostal, is that the same as the High Calvinist? Really? Is that the same? I'll say this, from my perspective, there are elements of Calvinism that I think are antichrist, that I think make God look like a monster. Is it the same? Is Christianity really the same? And do we say Christianity is true in light of all the scandals? In light of, look, I mentioned the bishop and the Catholic priest scandal. I don't want to just pick on Catholics, and I don't need to because evangelicals and Protestants have made a mess of it. But do you know that scandal was born out of protecting the church? That scandal was born out of the attitude that if this gets out, what a stain it will be on the message and on the church. And then people might go to hell because they reject the church because this got out. So we've got to cover it up. We'll shuffle some priests around and brush it under the rug and not talk about it and dismiss it. And the same exact thing happened. If you've watched recently the documentary about the Duggars and the Gothard and the whole thing about that, you see the Southern Baptists hiding sexual abuse and power abuse, hiding it for the same reason. You actually see fathers. Apparently, the Duggar father told his daughters who had been abused to take one for the team because it would look bad for Christ. As he's defending his pedophile son. All right. I don't need to get into all these specifics. You know, is that Christianity? Is that true? Is the Christianity that drove the Huguenots out of France true? Took their property, murdered them if they didn't move? Is that true? What about the Christianity that bombed each other in Ireland? Which one's true? If there's only one Christianity, as she's bringing it up here, and it's either true or it isn't, I'm afraid the world, if you're going to put it to them like that, is going to say it isn't. Because they're going to look at the bat crap wing of Christianity, which is very vocal, whether it's denying science or it's promoting, extreme political causes, or it's hiding bad behavior, or it's acting with hatred toward immigrants or the Q plus community, or it's demeaning of women. I could go on and on. When the world looks at that and they say, see, the Christian church is 200 years behind everyone else when it comes to science, when it comes to the elevation of women, when it comes to the reaction of complex sexuality, they're going to say, it isn't. You're going to make me choose between that and reality. I'm afraid I'm going to have to choose reality. And this is what I think is painful. I think George MacDonald was right when he said theologians have done more to harm the gospel than its visceral opponents, than its, than the most raging of atheists. We do a number on Jesus Christ. I mean, and God in both volumes spoke about people taking his name in vain. And we major in that. We major in minors, and we do so with the authority of arrogance and ignorance. We believe we're speaking for God. Do you realize the burden that is? To take that upon yourself, to suggest to others that, God spoke to me and this is what he told me about you. And this is how you should think and feel. Instead of just embracing kind of what Madeline L'Engle said, which is we don't inspire people to admire our Lord by telling them how wrong they are, or how ugly they are, or how depraved they are, or how stupid their religion is. We do so by sharing that beautiful story that Tolkien told about, that every man wants to believe is true. We do so by showing them a light that is so beautiful, that light is Jesus Christ, that they want to know the true source of it. And this is where I think we've gotten off step or out of tune with Christianity and apologetics, is we've spent so much time and energy trying to defend the indefensible when it comes to the church or the Bible, and Jesus never comes up. People don't care. They don't care to ask us what inspires about Jesus. And when they do, so many Christians give an answer, worldview. They start talking about worldview and they end up in politics, questions about politics. They don't talk about how Jesus ministered to the church he saw, which was the woman, the outcast at the well, the hated tax collector, the hated centurion, the leper, the marginalized. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the hard things where Jesus tells us that possessions should be a really low priority and people should be a high priority. As a matter of fact, we should sell everything and tend to the poor. We don't want to talk about Jesus when he tells us to turn the other cheek. So, now listen, 99% of my messages here, and they're not messages, we're just having a conversation, are for me to hear. I'm telling myself, remember this, pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful. So I must say, when it comes to to Jimmy, the Grateful Dead, and Jesus, I think it can be inspired by all of them. I'd say this to Christians who say, "Oh, just Jesus," or "just the Bible." You can be inspired by Jesus and Epictetus and Francis Ford Coppola and Lady Gaga and Charles Schultz. I almost said Jerry Seinfeld, but Jerry doesn't inspire me. He makes me laugh. What inspires you lately?
The goddamn bridge.
The goddamn bridge. Oh, you want to show it? And Peyton's just not cursing just to curse, right? You want to explain it and show it, Poe? Here, let me go to this one, and then I'll go to this one when you're ready. Or do you want me to go to that one right now?
Whatever.
So, what did you draw here and tell us?
How about you explain it?
I don't know.
Well, you picked it.
Well, you did ask me to pick 3 words before we went on today, and I said billboard, I said the goddamn bridge, and what else?
Stromboli.
And Stromboli. From things we've been watching lately. So the goddamn bridge is from a Stephen King's latest novel, Fairy Tale, which is Peyton's reading it to Wendy and I, and it's about a boy. Doesn't he lose his mother on that bridge, and that's why it's that, or whatever. Is that right? Am I getting it right? And so that's referred to as the goddamn bridge. But so I brought that up, and then the billboard was from Better Call Saul, but I didn't tell you that. And then you have Eat Stromboli on there. So you did use all 3 of my words to inspire you.
It says 100% not cannoli.
100% not cannoli.
Yeah.
I love it. Leave the gun, take the cannoli. Well, anyway, I hope I planted a few seeds for y'all today just to think about, and as Walt Whitman and Ted Lasso say, be curious, not judgmental. And then some of you will point out, I was just judgmental of Alyssa Childers. Yes, of the gatekeepers. I do, because I lived in that world. I remembered that world. I was a gatekeeper. I would have said something just like Alyssa Childers said back when I knew everything. But I don't think it's fair to say, when I have my doubts, I don't have the luxury of this. We all have doubts. We all have questions. And that's healthy. That's the scientific method. And we could bring it across into what we call the queen of the sciences, theology. And it's been missing for so long. We are drinking from stagnant water. So, what inspires you? Jesus does inspire me. I've been thinking about it, and I'm a big fan. And maybe some of you aren't. I get it. But what inspires you? Mark Twain inspires me. Wilde inspires me. I think Stephen King inspires you lately, right? Mm-hmm. Take inspiration from everywhere that helps you. Ted Lasso really inspires me. I think Ted Lasso, the show, is full of such good, not only from a psychological approach, but from a relational approach, and the character arcs and the redemption that you see in Ted Lasso. I think most Christians would be better off streaming the 3 seasons of Ted Lasso than listening to their pastor today. I really do. I really think, as that old pastor used to say, churches have become mausoleums. And that's something, by the way, Jesus said in his day. But I think they have. And I think we have to have the humility and the curiosity and the intellectual honesty to be able to take health-giving knowledge from wherever it comes, and to be grateful to God for that. Whether it comes from somebody within the church or without, whether it comes from a philosopher or a comic or an artist or an actor or a musician or a child or even a critic, even an enemy. Epictetus used to say, if somebody says something about you that's negative, consider it. And if it's true, adjust your character. And if it's not true, dismiss it, laugh it off. Don't carry it. It's not true. It's just one man's opinion, and the opinion is inaccurate. So, either correct it and then appreciate it, even if it came from an enemy, because if you respond to it in a positive way, your enemy has done you a favor. Your enemy has been a lesson and not a curse. All right, we'll stop there. You want to go swimming?
Maybe.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.